Hello again. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for Everyman IT. Today's class is on call routing. So this is the second class in the telephone systems series, and today we're going to talk about how you route calls through a telephone system. So basically what this means is when telephone calls come in from the outside world to your telephone system, what does a telephone system do with those calls? You know, it can send those calls off to something called an auto attendant. It can send those calls off to a particular extension. It can send them to a voicemail. It can send them to a hunt group. It can send them to a whole bunch of different things. Again, telephone systems are not very complicated, but they can actually do a surprising amount of things. You can do some pretty cool stuff if you understand what a telephone system is supposed to do. So this class, we're going to be talking about call routing. So again, this means when people call into your building, to your telephone system, what happens with the calls. If somebody's inside the building and calls in to your telephone system, what happens to the calls. And then also, something that you may not think about is you can actually program how calls are handled when they go to the outside world. So when somebody picks up a phone and goes to dial a number in the outside world, what happens then? What telephone lines are used? Are they allowed to use long distance, etc.? All of these things can be programmed into your telephone system, into your PBX. So this class is call routing. Give me a second and we'll dive right into this. So the first thing that we have to talk about and we have to clear up and make sure that you understand is that everything in a telephone system, in a PBX, is going to relate to an extension. Extension. So you know when you call a normal business or a normal organization, you know, and somebody will have given you a business card, and on their business card will be an extension. So you call that main phone number and it says, if you know the party's extension, please dial it now. And you dial, you know, 361 or 456 or whatever their extension is. You understand that telephone has an extension that relates to it. Well, the main thing to also understand is every single thing that relates to that PBX has an extension. So telephones, obviously, have extensions, but also voicemail boxes. So we talked about in our first class on Introduction to Telephone Systems where you can have voicemail boxes without telephones associated with them. So voicemail boxes has extensions. So those things you probably understand. Well then, intercom systems. So if your telephone has an intercom system, so you can go in, you can dial a number, and let's say you can talk to the warehouse. So you can say, hey, is anybody in the warehouse? Can you please come up front? Those have extensions. Enter. Not only that, but things like auto attendants that we are going to be talking about. So auto attendants are when you call into a business and it goes, thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy, the best place for computer repair in Baltimore. If you need sales, press 1. If you need technology support, press 2. I don't know. If you need a life, press 3. That is an auto attendant. Auto attendants are accessed through extensions. So every single auto attendant that you set up in your telephone system will have an extension. It'll be 805 or 806 or 809 or whatever. Hunt groups that we're going to be talking about are extensions. Call groups that we're going to talk about are extensions. Everything that PBX is going to interact with is an extension. So just make sure you understand that, like I say, because everybody understands, you know, so telephones are extensions. That makes sense. And then I say voicemails are extensions. Well, that makes sense. But the main thing to remember is that the intercom is an extension, the auto attendant. So everything we're going to be programming into this system is going to have an extension. The auto attendants will have extensions. The hunt groups will have extensions. The call groups will have extensions, etc. Now, the main thing to remember when you go in to deal with your telephone system is at whatever telephone system you have, you'll be able to configure a couple things. One is how many digits are in the extension. So you can say, in your company, 3 digits make it up extension. So you can have 806 or 001. I don't know. Any 3 digits will make up an extension. So you go into the telephone system and you say, I want my extensions to be made up of 3 digits. Or you can say, I want them to be made up of 2 digits. Or I can say, I want them to be made up of 1 or 4. So whatever you program in there is what you'll use. So if you say, I want 4 digits to be used as extensions, then you would have to put 40001 as an extension. Every extension would have to have 4 digits. Now, the big thing that a lot of people don't think about when they're setting up telephone systems is, you know, a lot of technology is not simply about understanding how to program something, but coming up with a plan for how to program things. So one of the first things that you're going to want to do if you're installing a telephone system is you are going to have to decide the extension range for both actual extensions that you're going to be using for telephones, for voicemail, etc., and then like the administrative extension range. So let's say we decide that we're going to have extensions with 3 digits. So these are 3-digit extensions. So what we would do is we would say, I want extensions 200 to, let's say, 500 to be related to actual telephones and voicemails. So if somebody calls 201, that will go to a telephone or go to a voicemail. If somebody calls 499, that will go to a telephone or a voicemail. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say extensions 800 to 999 will be the administrative extensions. So these are the extensions that are going to relate to auto attendants. These are the extensions that are going to relate to call groups, to hunt groups. Basically, these administrative extensions are extensions that nobody should actually dial. You know, this is not an extension where somebody should call into the phone system and they go, oh, I want a particular hunt group. I'm going to dial 801. That's not the case. These are the extensions that nobody should dial. They should be programmed into the system, but nobody's actually going to dial. The first range, like I say, the actual stations and the subscribers, those are the things that people are going to dial. When you call in, thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy. If you know the extension, dial it now. That will be 200 to 500. The 800 to 999 will be the ones that they're not supposed to actually dial. This, like I say, is one of those logistic things, but it really matters at the end of the day. So when you're setting up your telephone system, you know, 3 digits is a good number for how many extensions you should have. I mean, that gives you 999 extensions. That's usually good for people. So I would say you should set up your system to use 3 digits and then come up with a range, like I say, 200 to 500 or such. That's going to be used for stations and subscribers, so telephones and voicemail, and then come up with the administrative range. This is going to be for you to program things internally in the telephone system, but that people shouldn't just access willy-nilly. So this is extensions and something to understand. Now, once you understand extensions, the next thing, the next idea we need to talk about is something called call paths. Call paths. What a call path is this is what happens to a telephone call that goes to a certain extension. So a standard call path states, let's say if we're dealing with extension 301, so we're talking about extension 301. So somebody calls into the telephone system, they dial 301. The standard call path states, first ring the telephone, let's say 3 times. If the telephone is not answered, second, send the call to voicemail. So this is the stock standard call path that you almost always set up. So you say, if somebody dials extension 301, it's first going to ring 3 times at whatever station, you know, that's sitting at the desk. If nobody picks up, then it automatically gets sent over to voicemail. Now, this number of rings can be changed to anything you would like. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 10, it could be 25. You can always program how many rings you want to have happen here. So this is a very, very, very simple call path. You can make this much more complicated, and as you start dealing with telephone systems, you will come up with much more complicated call paths. So let's say somebody calls in to 301, and let's say 301 is sales. So first, you can say, I want the phone on 301's desk to ring 3 times. If your main sales guy, so let's say this is the sales manager, right? If the sales manager does not pick up after 3 times, then I want the phone call to be forwarded to the assistant manager's extension at, let's say, 302 to ring for 3 times. So what this states is somebody calls the sales manager at 301, phone rings 3 times. If the sales manager doesn't pick up, it automatically goes to his assistant or her assistant at extension 302 and rings 3 times. If that person doesn't pick up, third in the list, you want something called a call group. So this means, we'll talk about it in a little bit, so don't worry about it too much. We're just worried about call paths. So a call group is where a lot of phones are rung at the exact same time. So you may put 5 different extensions into one call group. So you're going to say, if the assistant doesn't pick up, I want the call group at 802 to ring 3 times. So this will ring out to 5 different desks. And then if that call group doesn't answer, then you can say, fourth, I want something called outcalling, where the sales manager's cell phone is going to be called. And that will ring 3 times. And then if he doesn't pick up on the cell phone, well, screw it. Then we're just going to drop the call into voicemail. So this would be like, imagine if you had, you had a phone number that people had to get through to, so emergency tech support or such. You can create a very, very, very complicated call path on what will happen when somebody dials this extension. So when somebody dials 301, first it's going to ring on the sales manager's phone for 3 times. If he doesn't pick up, it'll ring on the assistant's phone for 3 times. If that doesn't pick up, it'll ring on the call group. So this is where 5 different people phones will ring at the same time. If they don't pick up, then it will ring on a cell phone for 3 times. And then if it doesn't pick up, then it drops into voicemail. But this is what a call path is. A call path is what happens to a call when it goes to a particular extension. Does it just ring and then go to voicemail? Or, the most simple, the simplest one, and I talked about this before in the introduction to telephone class, is let's say you have a voicemail box with no telephone, because let's say you have field salespeople or such. So you could ring to 301 and first stop is voicemail. I suppose that's actually the simplest call path you can have. So somebody calls in, the person they're calling does not actually have a telephone sitting on their desk, so it drops straight into the voicemail system. That's it. But that's all a call path is. Again, they're important to understand, and most of the time, you're going to do 1-step call paths, 2-step call paths, maybe 3-step call paths. But understand, you could do a 50-step call path if you really, really, really wanted to. It is a possibility. But all call paths is what happens to a phone call when it comes into the system and goes to an extension. And again, you can state where that call gets directed, and you can also program in how many times things ring. So I want the first phone to ring 3 times. I want the second phone to ring 8 times. I want the third phone to ring 2. That can all be in the call path. So that is what a call path is. Now, next little bit of theory or concept that we need to talk about is something called outcalling. So now you understand that people can call in from the outside world. So you have your PBX here, and that's sitting in your building, right? And so people from the outside world can call in and they can get routed to an extension, let's say extension 301. You understand that. And you understand that the person at extension 301 can call through the PBX and go to the outside world. So they can talk to somebody over here. Well, what outcalling allows you to do is if somebody calls into the PBX is actually able to route that call out to the outside world. So let's say you have a sales manager at extension, again, let's say you have the sales manager or a tech person at extension 504. Just so you don't get confused with 301. So they are at extension 504. Now they are out in the field today, but they want to make sure that they actually get all of their phone calls. So they don't want to have to deal with voicemail. They don't have to get back to people. They want to make sure that they get all of their calls that day. So what the sales manager can do if out calling is set up in the PBX is he can forward all calls to extension 504 to 443-111-2222. So what will happen now is when somebody calls in from the outside world and goes to the PBX, and it says, "Thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy. Please dial the extension now." They will dial extension 504. Automatically, since that manager set up forwarding and out calling is enabled, as soon as they dial 504, then the PBX will automatically route that call out to the cell phone. So that is what out calling is. Out calling is when people can call in to the PBX, and then through forwarding or etc., the PBX will route the call back out to the outside world. So this could be to a cell phone, this could be to a home phone, this could be to another office, etc. Two big things that you just have to remember with out calling is out calling. Most people or most companies don't like out calling because this can cause a hellacious, horrible amount of problems. Because if somebody does something stupid and routes calls to long distance numbers or to foreign numbers or to God knows what, the company can get stuck with a huge bill. So a lot of companies, for security purposes, don't like out calling. So just something to think about. If you're worried about security at all, if you're worried about your clients or your employees doing something stupid at all, just shutting off out calling is probably a good thing. It is a feature in the voicemail system. You can either allow out calling or not allow out calling. Most people don't allow out calling. The next thing to remember is, remember before we were talking about trunks in the Introduction to Telephone Systems class. So every trunk line represents one incoming call and one incoming call or one outgoing call, right? When you have out calling enabled, you're using one trunk line for the call coming in and one trunk line for the call going out. So this call, so somebody calls in, dials extension 504, out calling calls the 443, the cell phone number. So this line is being used and this line is being used. So every single call you allow out calling for, you're not using one trunk line, you're using two trunk lines. So when this person calls in, it'll automatically route out to that cell phone or the home phone or the whatever office, to the phone on the outside world. That single call is going to be using two trunk lines. Two. So be careful with that, especially, like I say, if you're working in an environment where you're allowing out calling, because out calling can be a really great thing. Just understand you can use an atrocious amount of trunk lines really, really quick. Especially, like I say, if you have a lot of field technicians or a lot of field salespeople and you allow out calling, I mean, every call will use two trunk lines. So be very, very careful with this. So out calling basically allows the PBX to route calls from the outside world back to the outside world. Again, a lot of companies, for security purposes, they don't allow out calling, and inside the PBX you can turn out calling off. If you do allow out calling, the big thing to remember is every phone call that out calling is enabled for will use two trunk lines versus one. So that's what out calling is. Okay, so now that you understand a little bit of the theory, we'll go into the actual functions that you're going to set up within your PBX. Remember, the PBX is basically like the telephone server or maybe the telephone router. It is what routes all the telephone calls inside of your building. So, as we talked about in the Introduction to Telephone Systems class, you have your trunk lines. So your trunk lines are individual telephone numbers that come to your building from the outside world. So, you have Verizon, or you have your central office that you're connecting to, and then you have a certain number of lines that then plug in to your PBX. As we talked about before, each and every one of these lines has a phone number. So line 1, like I say, if we're talking about Eli the Computer Guy, was 410-685-2808. Line 2 was 410-685-2885. line 3, 410, 685, whatever. Line 4, 410, 685, again, whatever. So each one of these trunk lines that came in to the PBX had its own telephone number. Now again, as we talked about in the other class, on the central office side, so here the telephone company side, not the telephone system, the telephone company. So here it's Verizon, where you are at, it may be Bell Atlantic or AT&T or Qwest. On their side, you set up something called a hunt group. The hunt group states that when somebody calls 410-685-2808, if this line is busy, the call gets automatically and invisibly forwarded to the second number in the hunt group. If that is busy, the call gets automatically and invisibly forwarded to the third and to the fourth, etc. So this is how you have one main phone number, even though you have 4 or 5 or 20 different trunk lines coming into your building. So the first thing that we have to talk about with the trunk lines, so we have trunk line 1, 2, 3, and 4, is you can put these into what are called trunk groups. So So you can say, if you have all these trunk lines coming into your building, you can say, I want trunk lines 3 and 4 to be part of one trunk group. I want lines 1 and 2 to be part of a different trunk group. So basically what this does is this divides those two sets of trunk groups so that when somebody calls in on line 3 or 4, something different will happen than if somebody calls in at line 1 or 2. So maybe we'll explain this a little more so hopefully you'll understand better. So every single trunk group is going to get associated with an extension. So you know how we talked about the administrative extensions a little while ago? So what you'll do is you'll say, if a call comes in on trunk group, so you have trunk group 1, I automatically want that call to go to extension 800. If somebody calls in on trunk group 2, I automatically want that extension to go to 801. So that's all trunk groups are. We're going to talk about what you can do with these extensions in a few seconds. But the main thing to understand is you have all of these trunk lines coming into your building, whether you have 1, whether you have 10, whether you have 50. All those trunk lines are individual telephone numbers that come into your building. You have to put them into at least one trunk group. So you have something called a trunk group. So you can put all 4 into a single trunk group. Or you can divide them into different trunk groups. You may divide them into different trunk groups. Let's say you have a building and you're sharing space between multiple businesses. So you can say, if you're all using the same telephone system, you can say, I want the calls that come in on lines 1 and 2 to go to the auto attendant for Billy Bo Bob's electronic repair. I want the calls that come in on 3 and 4, trunk group 2, to go to Little Willie's cement reclamation shop. I want calls that come in on 5 and 6, trunk group 3, to go to the Bordello of Blood. I don't know. Whatever businesses you have in the business. So that's why you may use trunk groups, is like I say, is if you have one building and you have one telephone system and everybody is sharing the telephone system between different businesses, like I say, you can divide these trunk groups. So calls that come in for this group go to one auto attendant, calls that come in for this group go into another auto attendant, calls that come into this group go to yet a different auto attendant. But the big thing is the trunk lines that come in. These are the lines, each individual phone number that come into your building. They have to be put into at least one trunk group. You then program in the telephone system and you say any calls that come in to, like I say, trunk group 1 automatically get forwarded to extension 800. And in a second, we're going to talk about auto attendants and such, and so you know what extension 800 is. But basically, all you do is you say, any calls that come in for this trunk group go to this extension. These trunk lines go to this trunk group. That's pretty simple. Okay, so the call has come into the building on the trunk lines that are inside a trunk group. So your trunk group 1 forwards all calls to extension 800. So what we're going to do is we will go into the PBX, and what we will say is we want extension 800 to be an auto attendant. An auto attendant, if you live in the modern world, you have dealt with an auto attendant. You have probably been through auto attendant hell more times than you'd like to remember. So the auto attendant is when you call into a business, when you called into Eli the Computer Guy. Thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy. If you would like sales, press 1. If you would like technical support, press 2. If you would like a life, press 3. That is what an auto attendant is. Basically, all an auto attendant is it is a voice message. So it's a message that's talking to you. And then it is a set of programming that states if you press 1, you'll get transferred here. If you press 2, you'll get transferred here. If you press 3, you'll get transferred here. And if you don't do anything, you'll get transferred somewhere else. That's all an auto attendant is. Now, the first thing when you're dealing with your auto attendant that you'll be able to program into the system is during business hours and after business hours. So inside your PBX, you will be able to program in your hours of operation. Why this is important is because with these auto attendants, what you can do is you can set up 2 different things to happen. So during your when you are open, when your business is open, you can have it say, thank you for calling. For sales, press 1. Da, 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 da. Then, if you are closed, I'm sorry you have called us past business hours. Please leave a message in our general mailbox. So this auto attendant can be based on time, and this is depending upon the hours that you plug into the system. So any of these PBXs, you will plug in, whether you're open on Saturdays and Sundays, what your hours of operation are. And then when you go to program this auto attendant, you'll be able to say, do you have different messages for when you're open and when you're closed? If you do, then you can set up a different routine. So now we're going in and we are going to program for this auto attendant. So this is auto attendant 1. And this is going to be extension 800. So when you go into your PBX to create this auto attendant 1, the first thing that you're going to do is you are going to create an extension. So you are going to create extension 800. The PBX is then going to ask you, what is this extension? Is this extension a telephone? Is this extension a hunt group? Is this extension a call group, etc.? And what you're going to say is this extension is an auto attendant. So whatever system you're dealing with, it will basically ask you this question, or there'll be a checkbox, etc. Then what happens is, so you set up, and you are now setting up auto attendant 1. It will then ask you, do you have, are there business hours or not? And you set that up. The next thing, you set that up, it's pretty easy. The next thing it's going to ask you is, where does the voice come for the auto attendant? Now remember, and like I said, we talked about this in Introduction to Telephone Systems, where all this gets hinky and stupid and you just want to beat some telephone engineer's head into the ground that they ever came up with something this idiotic, is remember the PBX, this thing, routes calls. All it does is route calls. The voicemail system is what actually gives you things like voice prompts. So when you go in and you want to record, thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy, if you'd like sales, press 1, that is not recorded on the PBX. That is recorded in the voicemail system. So in the auto attendant, you're going to have to say what voicemail box contains the message that you want said. Like I say, thank you for calling my store. If you want sales, press 1. If you want, that is all programmed on the voicemail side. So hopefully you'll be smart and you'll say voicemail box 800. But that's the big thing. You're actually going to have to go into the voicemail system and program, and basically, just say the message. Thank you for calling our business, sales, press 1. But that is a message that resides on the voicemail system. It does not reside on the PBX. Then, once you've done this, so Auto Attendant 1 plays the message at voicemail box 800. Then all you do is you say, number 1, So that means if you press 1, route to extension, I don't know, 301. If they press 2, route to extension 400. If they press 3, route to extension 500. That's all you're going to do. So with the PBX, you program in and you say, play this voicemail box, and then you just say, if they press number 1, do this. If they press number 2, do this. If they press number 3, do this. Then if they press 0, what do you want to have happen? Now I know a lot of you say, oh, of course you're going to go to the receptionist. But you know, if you're like me and you don't really want to deal with clients, or if you're like Verizon and they don't really want to deal with clients unless the clients know what they want, the really sneaky thing that you can do with the 0, so you know, if they press 0, what you can do is you can route this to extension 800. So if they press 0, what will happen is they'll get routed to extension 800, which is the auto attendant, and basically they will just get the message played back to them. So if somebody, you can say, if they press 0, just route them back to the exact same extension they're at so they can figure it the hell out. So they think they're gonna get like the operator or receptionist, and they press 0 and they just go through the whole message again. It's sneaky and evil, but yeah, sometimes you gotta be sneaky and evil. And then the final thing that you're gonna have on here is the timeout. So you're gonna plug into this auto attendant and you're going to say, if somebody hasn't pressed a button in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, what happens next? So you can say for the timeout that it goes to extension, let's say 301, which is the receptionist. Or you can say if it times out, go back to extension 800 and basically just replay the auto attendant again. It's really up to you what you do with that. So this is basically how the auto attendants are programmed. So basically you have your trunk lines coming in. Your trunk lines are put into a trunk group. You say that trunk group automatically forwards to a certain extension. So here we're saying that that trunk group automatically goes to extension 800. We set up extension 800 as an auto attendant. So we say extension 800 is an auto attendant. Then we say auto attendant 1, this auto attendant. When this auto attendant is accessed, we want the message at voicemail box 800 to be played. Remember, that message is not inside the PBX, it's inside the voicemail system. So you say, I want this message to be played. Past that, if somebody presses 1, they go to this extension. Presses 2, goes to this extension. Press 3, go to this extension. Press 4, goes to this extension. If they press 0, what extension do they go to? Like I say, they can go to an operator, or you can send them back to extension 800, which is the auto attendant, which would make the auto attendant simply replay again. And then the timeout. So, you know, if they wait 10 or 20 seconds and then they don't do anything, what do you want to have happen? The timeout can be very important. You know, some people are still using those stupid little rotary dial phones, or maybe they're just retarded. So you may want the timeout to go to the receptionist so that they get through to somebody. Because if somebody has a rotary dial phone, they can't do an auto attendant. They just can't. They can't access this, so that can be a real problem. And then the other thing to remember is you do have your hours of operation that you can plug into your PBX. So within your PBX, you'll be able to say when you're open and when you're closed, and then you can actually program that into the auto attendant. So you can say auto attendant 1, when you're open, do this. Auto attendant 1, when you're closed, do this. So you can actually have it do different things. So when you're open, you can do a whole list of different stuff, and then when you're closed, you can say, I'm sorry, we are closed. Please leave a message in our general mailbox. It's really that simple. So this is an auto attendant, and it's a basic concept of how you program one. So now that we've talked about auto attendants, the next thing that we should talk about a little more, we've talked about it in the past, is hunt groups. So we've been talking about hunt groups for calls that are coming into your building. So like I say, you get 5 or 20 or 50 or whatever trunk lines coming from your central office to your building. If somebody calls the main number and it's busy, the call automatically gets forwarded to the second number, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Well, you can do the same thing internally for your extensions. So what you would do is you would create, let's say, extension 900. And you would say this extension is a hunt group, right? So that's all you do. So then you go down and you program the hunt group. They say this is hunt group 1. So I want the first person to be rung is, let's say, extension 301. If they don't pick up, I want the second person to be 302. Third, 303, fourth, 304. So what will happen, and then you say how many times you want them to ring, is when somebody calls in or they get extension 900, first the phone at 301 will ring. If it is busy or if nobody picks up, it'll automatically get forwarded to 302. If that is busy, it'll automatically get forwarded to 303. And if that is busy, it'll automatically get forwarded to 304. So this is very popularly used, especially in sales departments. So you have a group of 10 salespeople. So what will happen is if somebody calls, so we have the auto attendant. Remember the auto attendant we talked about? Well, let's say, if you want sales, press, I don't know, let's say 2, right? Well, 2 equals or corresponds to extension 900, which is a hunt group. So it goes, thank you for calling Eli the Computer Guy. If you would like sales, press 2. You press 2. 2 routes to extension 900. Extension 900 is a hunt group. So what happens then is it looks at the hunt group and it says, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is call extension 301. If that is busy or nobody picks up, I will call 302, 303, 304, etc. So all a hunt group states is if this is busy, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. Now, since you're dealing a lot of times with sales departments, and these people are very, very, very insanely competitive, you can actually have weighted systems. So your telephone system, if it allows it, this is a configuration that actually has to be programmed into the system. So all telephone systems will allow you to do hunt groups. Every single telephone system you will buy, if it's worth anything, if it's worth more than $25, will allow you to do hunt groups. What it may or may not allow you to do is something called weighted hunt groups. So what a weighted hunt group can do is when it calls into this hunt group, it'll say, oh, look, number 1 has already picked up 4 calls today. So that person's getting enough work. And then it'll go down and look and say, hey, number 2's picked up 3 calls. Number 3's picked up 1. Oh, but 4 has had no calls yet today. So with a weighted hunt group, what can happen is somebody calls in, that goes to extension 900. The hunt group has a little bit of brain power to it. So it can say, oh, number 4 hasn't gotten any calls today. I'm going to route this to number 4 first. If this is busy, then I will route it to number 3. If that is busy, I will route it to number 2, etc. So basically, what the hunt group is trying to do, what the programming is trying to do, is it's trying to be fair. So if you program a normal hunt group, that means the person in the number 1 slot will always get the call first. So again, in the sales realm, that's a bad thing. That's horrible for competition because the number 1 guy will always get the most amount of calls. If you have one of these weighted or one of these smart hunt groups, what it will do is it'll look and it actually keeps account of how many calls have been picked up, and it will always try to route to the lowest number. So like I say, if poor little number 4 down here hasn't picked up any calls today, it will route the call to number 4 first and then to the second least, etc. Within the hunt group, you can actually do a lot of other fancy programming, but that's another class. That's actually more of a vendor class. But within the hunt group, you can do so much programming on the different types of languages and skill sets and all that kind of stuff to do a hunt group. But basically, we're just staying with the simple hunt group today. So the basic hunt group states, you create the extension, let's say 900. That extension is a hunt group. That hunt group says the first person in the hunt group is 301. If they're busy, go to 302. If they're busy, go to 303. And if they're busy, go to 304. That is a standard hunt group. The smart hunt group or the weighted hunt group has a little bit of brain power in there. So it will say, hey, look, number 1 has picked up the most phone calls today, so I will route the call to the person who has picked up the least. If they don't pick up, I will go to the one that has picked up the next least, and then the next least, and then the next least, etc. So that is how hunt groups work. So now we talked about hunt groups, we have to talk about hunt groups like little brother called call groups. Call groups, for some reason, are not used as much as I would think they would be used. Most people use hunt groups, but call groups are an amazing thing. Basically, what call groups say is if you call the extension, let's say we're going to use 901 for call group. So we'll go into the PBX and we'll imagine that we're doing this. So what we'll say is we'll say extension 901 is a call group, right? Then you create call group 1. All call group 1 does is it says when a call comes in to that call group, ring all of these phones simultaneously. So maybe if you have a tech support department or sales, hey, if you really want to be really competitive with your sales force, screw the hunt group, do a call group. Because what will happen is every time a call comes into 901, every extension, so 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 3020, whatever, every single extension will be rung at once. So the phone call comes in, every extension gets rung at the exact same time. Whoever picks up gets the call. Everybody else loses. So that is what a call group is. Like I say, these are great, especially I've seen for like emergency response teams. So let's say you have like volunteer emergency response teams. So you have a number of leadership positions, especially if you have out calling involved. A call comes into the main number, goes to that call group, and then you have the lieutenant and the first sergeant and the chief and the medical and I don't know, whatever. The call that comes in, automatically every single phone in that call group gets rung at the same time. Whoever picks up gets the call. So this is very good. Like I say, is if you're dealing with emergency response, or again, if you're dealing with competitive salespeople, this is the best flipping thing in the world for competitive salespeople. Every single phone rings. It's you get to see how many of them have been playing like PlayStation or playing video games, and how Pavlovian they grab the phone. But basically, all a call group is, it's not complicated, it's not fancy. When somebody calls into the extension associated with the call group, every other extension in that call group is rung at the same time. So, like I say, if it goes into extension 901. 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, all at the exact same time ring. Whoever picks up the call, they get the call. Everybody else gets a dial tone if they pick up. But that's all a call group is. Incredibly useful. So as we finish up, we're going to talk about outgoing call routing. So all the calls we've been talking about are calls coming in. So they come in through the trunk lines that go into a trunk group that then get pointed at as an auto attendant, that then gets pointed at call groups, stations, voicemails, whatever you want to point them at. So now we're going to be talking about actually calling out to the outside world. So you have your central office here. You have your little building here with, again, your PBX. And let's say you have 4 lines going to the outside world. So when people are making outgoing calls, you can also tie, or you also do tie, these outgoing trunks into trunk groups. So you can have outgoing trunk group 1, outgoing trunk group 2, trunk group 3, etc. And actually these trunk groups are more important when you're talking about calling out. So you have incoming trunk groups and you have outgoing trunk groups. Most of the time these are separated. Why this is important is because if you go to your telephone company now, if you get a normal local telephone number, it'll cost you, let's say, $20 a month. If you get a phone number and you have unlimited long distance calls on it, it will cost you $50 a month. So if you have a business, you're probably going to want people to make, long distance calls every once in a while. But you don't want to pay any extra money to have the privilege of doing those long distance calls. So what you can do is you can separate your trunk lines into different trunk groups. So you can say trunk group 1 is only for local calls, and trunk group 2 is for local and long distance calls. So what will happen is you can program into the system and you can say, if somebody does not dial 1, you can use either, let's say, trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. So trunk group 1 is these two lines, and trunk group 2 are these two lines. This is long distance. This is local. So basically, if somebody's making a local call, they can use either trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. But you can go in and you can program, and you can say if somebody dials 1, force them to use trunk group 2. So they can only use trunk group 2. So if they dial 1, they can only use trunk group 2. So they can only use these two trunk lines that have that long distance service enabled on them. Now what will happen is if both of these phone lines are being used, when they go to dial that number, basically they will get a message from the system saying there are no lines available. So what will happen is if they go to make a long distance call and one of these lines is available, they'll be able to make the call out and talk to the long distance person. If, I don't know, you have 4 local calls all coming in, so line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4 are being used, and they try to make a long distance call out, then they will just get a message that says, I'm sorry, right now no lines are available. Be very careful with that little no lines are available thing. A lot of times people think that message is coming from the telephone company. So they'll call up Verizon or Quest or Bell Atlantic and they'll start screaming, why are there no lines available? It's not them. It's not your telephone company. It's your PBX saying that. Remember, your PBX does have some of these messages programmed into it. So if you try to call out and it says no lines available, a lot of times that is actually coming from your PBX. Now, with the outgoing calls, you can also program in to say that if the PBX sees a certain set of digits before a phone number, to do certain things. So, in this example, we have the local calls and we have the long distance calls. So if this is a 10-digit number and there's no ones in front of it, use either trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. If this is an 11-digit number with a 1 in front of it, only use trunk group 2. But what you can also do, let's say you have managers, and sometimes managers have to make a long distance call. Who the hell cares about the price? I don't care if it costs you $10 a minute, you have to call out. Well, what you can do is you can put a programming into the system that says if you see, let's say, a 15-digit number and the first 4 digits are 9876 followed by 1, 888, 966. Basically, if it sees this code in the beginning, then it can also use trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. And then you can give this code to your managers or to the important people and say, if you have to make a call, an absolute emergency, dial this code in before you make the call, and you will be able to use any trunk group that is available. So that's one of the important things. Now, like I said, when you're programming this into the system, just so you understand this a little better, is if you have multiple trunk groups, so I say trunk group 1 and trunk group 2. What you're going to program in for how to use these trunk groups is you're going to say how many digits is the phone number. So here in Maryland, we have to use 10 digits. We have to use the area code and the rest of the phone number. So 443 XXXXXX. So even local calls have to be 10 digits. So basically what you would say is if it's a 10-digit number, use either trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. So you type in how many digits, etc. Then what you say, then you program in. So for your long distance, you would say for 11-digit numbers, so 1, 443, use only trunk group 2. So you would say for 11 digits, make sure it's 1. So with the first number being 1, you would use trunk group 2. Then what you can do, like I say, to give your managers a special code, is you can say, like I say, 15-digit numbers. So if somebody dials in 15 digits, where the first 4 is 9867, and then there's a 1, so the 1's for long distance, and then 443, the rest of the phone number. Then also use trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. So basically the main thing is what you can do is for outgoing calls, you can divide your lines into different trunk groups. Like I say, this is very important because that means, especially like I say, if you don't make a lot of, your business does not need to make a lot of long distance calls, you can have it so you only buy one long distance line. So you have one line that can do long distance because you don't do very much long distance. So this one line you pay $50 for, the other ones you pay $20. Over a month, that can be $100 or $150 in savings easily. So basically, like I say, you can divide the outgoing trunks into different trunk groups, local, long distance, even international. You can put like an international line on there. Then within the system, what you will say is, like I say, you'll say 10-digit numbers go to these trunk groups. 11-digit numbers go to these trunk groups. 15-digit numbers go to these trunk groups. And that's how you deal with outcalling, and that's how you prevent people, from dialing long distance and etc. Or, like I say, is if you have a telephone system, you can also do this for security purposes. If you don't want anybody doing long distance, you can say any phone number with a 1 in the beginning doesn't get to call out. So you can say any phone number at all that begins in 1, just do not connect the call. They're not allowed to use any trunk group. So if somebody tries to use your telephone system to make a long distance call, it'll die. Nothing will happen. So this is outgoing trunk groups. When you start playing with this, like I say, the technical part of outgoing trunk groups is dirt simple. The logical, like I say, a lot of computers and a lot in technology is much more about planning and logistics than it is about actual bits and bytes. This is one of those examples. Setting this up is really simple, and once you do it once, you'll be able to do it in your sleep. It's that simple. But deciding how many outgoing trunk lines you need, how to divide those into trunk groups, who gets the right to make long distance calls, etc. That is what can be just an utter nightmare. But this is outgoing call routing, and like I said, it can save you a lot of money if you do it right. So that's the class on call routing, and that is basic call routing in a nutshell. Everything I showed you today with auto attendants, after-hour greetings, hunt groups, call groups, outgoing call routing, that is what you are going to use for 99% of all businesses out there. There are more features and more functions that can be used in telephone systems, but really, unless you're an enterprise class telephone system administrator, you're not going to be messing with those functions or features. Telephone administrators are their own profession unto themselves in the enterprise world, and they can do really, really complicated, insane routing schemes. You guys out there, if you're beginning in the technology field, or even if you're consultants or mid-level techs, everything I just showed you is basically what you're going to use. This stuff is not complicated, like I say, as long as you understand these concepts. If you understand what an auto attendant is, if you understand what a hunt group is, call groups, if you understand that everything within the PBX isn't associated to an extension. Again, there are stupid logical things that people just can't get through their head, and I've seen that. An auto attendant is an extension. A telephone is an extension. A call box is an extension. A warehouse intercom system is an extension. Anything that resides or that's programmed in the PBX is an extension. The other thing to remember, like I say, is that all the voice prompts, all the voice stuff, voicemail, the auto attendant message, for whatever insane, stupid reason, that all resides on the voicemail system. And I've seen this even with voice over IP systems, although the voice over IP is all in one single box and it's all been meshed together, they still logically divide this many times, which just makes it, like I say, just a nutty pain in the butt. So you program the auto attendant features inside the PBX. So you say, if they press 1, this extension is called. Press 2, this extension is called. If it times out, dial this extension. They press 0, dial that extension. That's programmed in the PBX. But then within that auto attendant, you say, where does the message get played from? And that has to point to a voicemail box. So extension 800 will point to voicemail box 800 as where the message resides. Just like I say, just remember that, because it's just stupid, but how it goes. And with all of this, like I said, we talked about call paths. Call paths are a very important thing. That is how a call actually gets routed in the system. So the simplest call path is it goes straight to voicemail. The next call path is it rings a phone so many times and then goes to voicemail. But you can make a call path 50 steps long if you really wanted to. So it calls this phone, then it calls the assistant's phone, and then it calls a cell phone, then it calls a hunt group, then it calls a call group. Then it calls, I don't know, whatever the hell else. I mean, you can make one of these steps insane. I've made them up to 10 steps legitimately, depending on what you're doing. It just depends. We talked about the incoming trunks, and we talked about those trunk groups. So like I say, is if you have a single building, but you have multiple businesses in the building all using the same PBX system, you can say the calls coming into trunk group 1 will get routed to the auto attendant for Billy Bo Bob's computer repair. If the calls come into trunk group 2, it will get routed to Little Joe Mary's data recovery. If it comes into trunk group 3, it will get routed to the auto attendant for, auto salvage yard or something. So if everybody's in the same building using one PBX, you can route to different auto attendants based on the trunk group. So everything comes into one PBX, but then gets routed out beyond that. Talk about the auto attendant. We talked about the hunt groups, where, like I say, the first number rings. If that's busy, it goes to the next extension. If that's busy, it goes to the next extension. If that's busy, it goes to the next extension. And that's the simplest form of hunt group, and that's what you're normally going to use. If you're dealing with sales environments or anything like that, you can use weighted hunt groups or smart hunt groups. What that will do is within the telephone system, there's like a little ticker or a little counter. So basically, it'll look for the extension that has had the least number of calls. So if the person at the first extension has picked up 4 calls and the person at the 4th extension has picked up 0, it will automatically go to the 4th extension, and then it will look for the person who's picked up the least amount of phone calls. We talked about call groups. Call groups are where every single phone number gets rung at the same time. Like I say, this is fabulous for like sales departments. You get to see who plays a PlayStation, who's twitchy, who will grab the phone the quickest. Because basically, call comes into that call group extension. Every phone rings at the same time. Whoever picks up the phone wins. Everybody else doesn't get the call. This is good for sales departments, or like I say, like emergency response teams, etc. We talked about out calling. So out calling is where a phone call can come into the PBX, and then the PBX can route that phone call back out to the outside world. So like I say, if you have a manager or if you have a field person, they can forward their phone, their extension, to the cell phone that's sitting in their pocket. This can be very, very useful. So like I say, if you have like an emergency response team, the call comes into that PBX, and then if you have a call group, all those cell phones will get rung at the same time. Where you have to be careful is, like I say, this can get hacked, which is a bad thing. That's why a lot of companies actually turn off out calling altogether. And the other thing is, remember, every single one of those calls will take 2 trunk lines. So because you have the incoming call in, and then you have the call going out. So each one of those calls uses 2 trunk lines. If you have a lot of field people, that can eat up a lot of trunk lines really quick. And then finally, we talked about outgoing call routing. Again, like I say, just like you have the incoming trunk groups, you can have the outgoing trunk groups. So you can put the long distance trunk lines into trunk group 2. You can put the local trunk lines into trunk group 1. So basically, whenever anybody wants to get a local call, they can use trunk group 1 or trunk group 2. If they try to make a long distance call, they only get to use trunk group 2. If both of those lines are being used, they don't get to make a call. And then also, we were talking about, you can put that little code in. So again, if you have a manager, emergency response person, and they have to make a call, even if it costs $10 a minute, they could plug in that number, and then they get to use the local line to make a long distance call. It can be done. As I said in the beginning, the introduction, like I say, this is more of a theory class. But this theory works on all telephone systems. These are the basic concepts concepts that make telephone systems work. So whether you're using a VIA system, whether you're using Nortel, Mitel? Is Mitel still around? One of those. Whether you're using the new voice over IP, Switchvox, or Asterisk, these concepts I talked about today are used in all of them. Again, within this telephone system class, this track, I'm not really going to show you how to specifically administer any single system because, like I say, all these systems are built very proprietarily. So, you know, Avaya has a different interface than Switchvox, has a different interface than Asterisk, that has a different interface than Nortel. So, you know, every man IT, we're not here to show you how to use each individual type of interface. It's the overall concept. But just understand that no matter what telephone system you're going into, it will use what we talked about today. It will be able to do hunt groups. It will be able to do auto attendants. It will have call paths. You know, how you program it might be a little different, but you will be able to program it. This is how it works across the board. So I think this is a pretty simple class today. This wasn't one of our most complicated ones. I hope you followed all of this. We're going to be having more classes on this telephone system class. This track, you know, we'll probably have, I don't know, about 10 classes altogether for this track. I hope you've enjoyed this and you understand this. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This class was call routing, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.